Last month, a report from Goldman Sachs blew up across personal finance circles. 40% of people earning over $500,000 a year were still living paycheck to paycheck. What was your first reaction? A joke? A bad statistic? But it wasn't a joke. Even more ironically, among this group of high earners, fewer than 1 in 3 consistently saved for retirement or paid down debt. Just imagine that, making more than $500,000 a year, yet ending every month with nothing left. What kind of logic creates that? Let's look at real people. Take a doctor fresh out of medical school. As a resident, they start at around $60,000 a year. 5 years later, after becoming a specialist, their income jumps to $300,000. Another 10 years later, after opening a private practice, they're making more than $500,000 a year. That sounds like the standard path to success, right? But here's the problem. According to an annual survey by the American Medical Association, more than 70% of US doctors lack structured financial education early in their careers. That isn't unique. Honestly, most people lack financial discipline. The difference is that high income gives people like doctors access to more dangerous financial tools from the very beginning. And because they're already used to carrying six-figure debt from medical school, banks can very easily sell them large mortgages and car loans. Even experienced finance professionals can fall into the same trap if they're not careful. Giving that much leverage to someone who doesn't really understand it is dangerous. It's like skipping to the end of a difficult game and handing yourself a max-level character. In theory, you have every tool you need, but unless you actually know what you're doing, the smallest mistake can make the whole thing collapse. Doctors get attention for this because their financial stress has been linked to worse patient outcomes, but they're not alone. The deeper problem is this: you mostly compare yourself to people just like you. Take John, a mid-level lawyer at a top law firm in New York. He spent 10 years working in Manhattan, and his salary finally reached $300,000 a year. Sounds pretty good, right? But his $6,500 monthly rent, $3,000 private school tuition, and $2,000 in social and professional expenses leave him with almost no savings. Meanwhile, the people around him are talking about summer houses in the Hamptons, and he can't even put together a down payment. Inside your social circle, it's obvious who has money and who looks more successful. But, aside from small differences, the people earning 10% less than you and the people earning 10% more than you are all living basically the same kind of life. A Stanford social network analysis found that professional circles shape social boundaries, and 87% of close friendships among high earners come from similar income groups. That means day after day, you're surrounded by people living roughly the same lifestyle. Of course, take-home pay can still vary. Your neighbor may be one rung above you on the corporate ladder, and suddenly you feel pressure to keep up with their new car, or their better vacations. And that illusion of equality is exactly what makes the trap so powerful. What's really strange is this: the market has already turned your anxiety into a business. Look at Michael, a tech executive in Silicon Valley. His startup just went public at a $1 billion valuation, and his personal equity stake is worth around $10 million. Sounds like financial freedom, right? But his new social circle is full of billionaire investors. He feels forced to join a private aviation club with $250,000 annual dues, because that's where his investors do business. He feels he has to buy a $6 million house in Palo Alto, because that's where his CEO neighbors live. He feels he has to send his kids to a private school that costs $60,000 a year, because that's the standard package for Silicon Valley elites. Michael realizes that in billionaire circles, his $10 million is just entry level. To maintain his network and his career, he has no choice but to join the competition in high-end spending. Companies have already realized that this is where the money is, and they've rushed in to fill the gap. Products, services, and experiences aimed specifically at high-income consumers have exploded in recent years. But this isn't just about physical products. More deeply, it has created an entire professional ecosystem built around serving high earners. High-income families can't slow down, so they need more services. Service providers depend on those families continuing to spend, so they also have to keep moving at a high speed. Geography is another trap. Unless you run your own business, or work as a specialist physician, only a handful of cities in America offer jobs that pay more than $500,000 a year: Seattle, Silicon Valley, Manhattan, and Miami. Those cities have some of the most expensive housing markets on earth. A normal family home already costs 7 figures. Add a 50-year mortgage, subtract taxes, and what's left in actual disposable income can shrink to around $50,000 a year. I know what you're thinking. For most families, $50,000 a year sounds like a dream, but there are two reasons it feels completely different to ultra-high earners. First, high income does not mean financial skill. People who choose high-status careers are often driven by status itself. And they will happily go into debt to maintain that image in front of their peers. $50,000 can pay for a comfortable life, but not a luxurious one. And people who land high-income jobs often feel entitled to luxury, because it took years of intense competitive education to get there. So the moment they get their first real paycheck, it feels like time to reward themselves. Sociologists call this professional circle solidification. Wherever you land on the income ladder, you end up copying the lifestyle of that tier, and that creates something almost absurd, like the New York hedge fund manager earning $2 million a year who complains that Hampton's summer rentals have risen to $150,000 a month, making real luxury unaffordable for him. That's just one of many examples of millionaires complaining about how hard life has become for them. It's funny to laugh at, but there's something deeper going on underneath it, and then you begin to see the harshest form of the trap. The system is already complete. Take a specialist doctor's household in Boston. They earn $500,000 a year. On paper, financial freedom looks close, but a $12,000 monthly mortgage, $10,000 in private school costs, and $3,000 in club dues already consume 65% of their income. They can't stop because stopping would mean losing all of it. This is no longer a collection of isolated cases. You think a higher income will make you safer. In reality, it only makes the cost of stepping back higher. You think you're upgrading your life. In reality, you're upgrading your dependence on cash flow. You think you're buying success. In reality, you're buying a structure that becomes harder and harder to leave. A lot of people realize too late that they never actually escaped the oldest rule of all. If you keep going, the money keeps coming. The moment you stop, the entire structure starts to reveal itself. The only difference is that your time is priced higher. But a higher price also comes with higher expectations, higher consumption, and higher fixed costs. You end up trapped in a more expensive survival model. And that's how you get the brutal reality. Doctors working until 65 or even 70, not because they love the work, but because they can't afford to retire. Lawyers staying in firms until their bodies start to give out, not because they want to win more cases, but because they can't stop. So what really traps many high-income professionals may not be laziness, and it may not be incompetence with money. It's that they've tied income, identity, housing, education, and respectable living into one tightly connected system. On the surface, that system looks like success. In reality, it demands that they keep operating at high speed, and never slow down. If higher income only makes it harder to step back, then what exactly are so many people chasing so desperately? Success, or just a more expensive form of dependence? A career is not all of life, and wages are not the only form of wealth. True freedom comes from choice, not necessity.